Dear Earthmates, today we are visiting Farangis Ghaderi, whom I met at an international meeting, and thanks to Judith Hill and other colleagues about the situation in Iran, Kurdish literature, what's going on in the Middle East and the rest of the world. So thank you so much for accepting the invitation, dear Farangis Ghaderi.
Thank you so much, Tarek. Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. And you're currently in the UK, in England?
Yes, in Exeter.
Exeter. And you focus on Kurdish literature, am I right?
That's right.
And Middle East studies. Were you born in Iran, or?
Yes, yes, I was born in a city called Saqqez, which is on Iran-Iraq border in Kurdistan province, west of Iran. I was brought up in Saqqez, but my parents are not from that town. They're originally from a village. They migrated to Saqqez primarily to give their children opportunity of access to education.
I see. And then how did your love for literature begin?
I think it definitely started at home. My father, both my parents didn't have access to education, formal education, but my dad was allowed to, when he was a teenager, there was a special course that he attended, 6 years of education, only 6 days of education. And during that 6 days, he learned alphabet, and then he basically taught himself Farsi and then later Kurdish, started reading literature, Persian and Kurdish, and he started writing poetry as well. And whenever he was writing a new poem, he would come and ask me, what do I think of the poem? He would read it out. I think so I was assigned with my first literary criticism job there. And I would listen, even though I was little, I would listen carefully and would comment on rhyme and rhythm or certain imagery in the poem. And my father would most of the time accept my opinion. And this was really an amazing experience. And later at school, in Iran, studying literature is part of the curriculum, as an important part of the curriculum. We studied classical Persian literature. Unfortunately, we didn't have in Iran. There isn't any education on other literatures and languages of Iran. So I didn't have. I wasn't taught Kurdish at school. But my father taught me the alphabet and some basics very reluctantly. And then we had books, mostly poetry books. I started reading at school. So at school, I learned about classical Persian literature and modern literature later. And at home, I learned about Kurdish literature. Again, mostly classic, some modernist poet as well. And later, so at school, basically, my two favorite subjects were math and literature. And I was originally planning to pursue math in university, but due to some circumstances, I ended up studying English literature, which was an amazing experience in Iran. And that was where I really learned about literary theory, world literature through English, the amazing heritage of English literature, and also, you know, modern world literature. But my study, my reading of Kurdish literature was on the side until I finished my MA in Iran in English literature. And I was really craving for studying, doing a PhD, doing my doctoral study on Kurdish literature, because I was thinking that what can I add to the study, to the knowledge on English literature? To me, like, that was all the fascinating, you know, studies all around the world, and being English literature being the focus of you know, scholarly attention all around the world. I felt like I can't add to that, but perhaps I can add to knowledge, human knowledge, if I focus on Kurdish literature, which is not much known. But I couldn't do that in Iran because it's not Kurdish literature. At the time was not even a subject at university, but of course that has changed now. Kurdish language and literature is a BA, is taught at undergrad level. And I ended up coming to the UK. And why UK? Because at the University of Exeter, there is a Center for Kurdish Studies, and that's the only center, academic center in Europe, entirely dedicated to the study of Kurds, politics, society, history, and literature. And then and I was fortunate to receive a scholarship to do my PhD. Without that, I couldn't have done a PhD here. So that's how I ended up doing my PhD on Kurdish literature and Kurdish, the arrival, the emergence of modern poetry specifically.
Wonderful. I also studied English language and literature at Istanbul University. My graduation thesis was on the Apology for Poesy by Sir Philip Sidney. Yes, well, English has become the world language, and the world English is the majority language now in the world, I think, spoken by non-native speakers like ourselves. Yes, literature is a great field, a combination of history, philosophy, life, of course, in general, etc. There's always a lot to learn. And if I weren't a writer myself, I would be a better reader. I think there are still classics I haven't read. I've been focusing on writing so much. It's a need, as you know, that I'm not as good a writer as a reader as I should be. But in my 70s now, I want to finish a few things as a writer, and in my 80s, I want to become a better reader. That's my future plan.
Yes. Certainly doing English literature changed my life, I think, because it just broadened my horizons beyond my expectations.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and one of our mutual friends is Dr. Selim Temo. He's a great person, a wonderful scholar. And one of the missing things in this wonderful encyclopedia, the Princeton Encyclopedia of Poetry and Poetics, is that there is no entry for Kurdish poetry. It's missing, and I think Selim Temo is one of the candidates. I've sent a message or two to the editorial board of that wonderful encyclopedia, and that should be done, don't you think? I mean, some people should do that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's very important to when we talk about the Kurdish language, and it's often associated with the term minority language. It's really important to remember that that minority position is an imposed position on Kurdish language, because in terms of its speakers, it's not a minority speaker. It's spoken by over 30, up to 40 or maybe more millions of speakers. So its speakers number are higher than some European languages, are not called minority languages and are globally recognized. You would find entries on them, as you mentioned, in a global, in a world encyclopedia of literature and languages. Yes. Whereas Kurdish has been deprived of that visibility. And it is important to remember that minority is a political, cultural, social, economical position. Again, that they've been imposed on Kurdish. But because of all this situation, because of the political suppression, because of the geopolitical position of Kurdistan and Kurdish people and language, it has been we could use the word invisibilized in the world literary arena. And it's only
wonderful expression, invisibilized.
Yes, because it's there. It was there. It's not. It has Kurdish has a long and really rich literary tradition. Some of the dialects, so it's varied. Each of the dialects of Kurdish have their own literary traditions, and some of them, for instance, Gorani, Horami. The earlier texts that we know, I mean, there are many speculations, but to be very conservative, would we have texts from the 14th and 15th century? So it's an ancient, old literary tradition. But why? This is the question: why it hasn't made it to the international recognition or even national recognition? When we talk about, often when there is a discussion, for instance, on Iranian literature, on Iranian language and literature, it's just reduced to Persian, while Kurdish literature, for instance, the Gorani literary tradition, which is the oldest literary tradition, Kurdish literary tradition, is the home is Iran, was the Persian Empire. But you won't see discussions of this, the inclusion of Kurdish in anthologies of Iranian literature, in scholarly studies of Iranian literature. And the same story for Turkey, and the same story for Syria. Iraq is somewhat different because of its political and historical situation. So this invisibilization, this erasure has happened nationally and internationally. But it has been challenged, certainly, especially in the last decades or so, the last few decades, but I think the last 2 decades that we have, it's like an explosion of studies, scholarly studies, and translation of Kurdish literature in different dialects that has challenged that erasure. And I'm very glad to see that more and more people, when they put panels, when they organize activities, start an initiative, are conscious of the cultural diversity of the region. For instance, I mean, an excellent example was the panel that we met through which the PEN organized panel, Judith Hill organized, it was Iran and women of Iran, but there were two Kurdish women in the panel. This is new, and it's promising, and it's exciting. It's very exciting for Kurds to finally be seen.
Yes.
And it deserves, Kurdish literature truly deserves to be seen.
Definitely. And in India, the caste system, one of the castes is unseeables, I think. There are untouchables, and then there are also the lowest caste, as far as I know, was, or maybe still is, unfortunately, unseeables. You don't even see them. You're not supposed to see them. It hurts. It hurts. I mean, the very idea. And I say in Turkey, I say in those of us who were brought up on the West, in Western Turkey, like myself, those who have never been to Diyarbakir, to Southeast Turkey, or from the Kurdish point of view, North Kurdistan, they should say nothing about the situation in Turkey. They don't deserve to say anything. Go and spend a week in Diyarbakir. It's it's one of my ethical things, and I also want to do it, to learn a little bit of Kurdish. It has been on my agenda for more than 3 decades. Unfortunately, actually, and that's one of the things. And another thing is, I worked in Saudi Arabia for 4 years between 1982 and 1986 after the military coup d'etat staged by the USA, as many military coups take. Iran, for example, Mossadegh. I mean, if there is such a theocracy in Iran, it's because of the UK and the USA intervention against the democratically elected secularist Mossadegh in 1950s. Many Americans don't know this. And once you put pressure, I mean, why is Catholicism so strong in Ireland or in Poland? Because of oppression, I think. When there is oppression and no gate for freedom of expression, democracy, people they hold on to mostly religion, understandably. And, that's it. Anyway, on my way back to Turkey, on the plane, I thought, what can be a utopian and realistic project? And I said, Secular Democratic Middle East Federation. That was 1986. And I still think that the only outcome, the only way out, is a Secular Democratic Middle East Federation, confederation, whatever one can call it. Because, and I've preparing a book. I'll be happy if you help me with that. We can do it together with other Earthmates from that region. Proverbs from different nations or societies of the Middle East, collected in all the major languages of the Middle East, translate. And I want to call it the wisdom of the Middle East, because from above, only bombs are coming down. So the Middle East peoples should, everywhere in the world. So we need a more future-oriented approach. That's why I want to consider myself an amateur futurist historian activist. And we need to know about the past, but if we are buried in the past, then we keep repeating blood feuds and negative interactions. But let's be aware of the facts, and then let's try to build the future together. And that's why meetings like this, very few in number, but still, our conversation now is in itself a stone, a step towards a bridge. It is a bridge in itself. So once again, I thank you. And
no, thank you for all the great work that you do.
Just it's synergy. And what's on your agenda these days? What are you working on? What is one of your projects?
So at the moment, I am part of a large project called the Digital Archive of the Middle East project, DAME, at the University of Exeter. It's a
Wonderful.
yes, it's a really exciting project where with colleagues. The aim is to create a digital archive, starting with the archives that we hold at the University of Exeter. We have amazing body of archives in different languages, including Kurdish, and also promote research in the archive. And I am responsible for the Kurdish component of it. Right now, I mean, for the last year, since last year, I have really focused on archives of Kurdistan. I'm working on an article on this. This is the result of my scoping archive in its broad definition, public and private archives in Kurdistan. For various reasons, primarily question of access, I've limited it to Iraqi Kurdistan, Bashur, because the assumption, even for myself, was that we have lost a lot. We have lost so much of our written heritage, of our cultural heritage, because of decades of suppression, of war, instability, forced relocation, etc. Imagine that. Just remember that possession of a Kurdish book was a crime. Certain periods of time in the modern period in Iran, in Iraq, in Turkey, in Syria. So how do people? How do we have an archive? This was the first question. Do we have a Kurdish archive, or have we lost? Because the assumption has been that we have lost a significant portion of it. And that's true, but a significant body of archive has also survived. And I'm really interested in the stories, and this I've called it archival resistance. How people have managed to save their archives, be it the private archives, no matter the scope, how big. But people have really, the people I've interviewed, archivists that I've interviewed, have gone through extreme measures to protect and save these archives. And these are dispersed archives. They're not connected. We don't have a national archive yet, unfortunately, although the Kurdistan government and the Ministry of Culture is in process of setting up a national state archive. But we don't have a state archive yet. And these archives, private and public, some of them are not connected. So that's my work has been making a connection between these archives and our project, building a network and building a relationship with them. We have signed agreement with two of them, so they share the archive with us and the digitized materials, so that we can host some of them in our platform, and that way would make it, you know, more accessible worldwide, and also we aim to promote study of these archives. And there can be, I mean, there's so much one can do with these archives. Really, when you look at them, our understanding, I strongly believe, you know, looking at the archive is a way for Kurdish studies, because there is a narrative, there is a framework, and studying, investigating archives on unseen materials, primary source materials, is very likely to change our perspective or our view on so many points and so many aspects, history, politics, and literature including. And I'm also very interested in erasures in these archives. So I talked about the erasure of Kurds, you know, in the region, within the national.
I couldn't catch the word. Erasure?
Erasure, the omissions that has happened in this, how certain texts, certain material are excluded, the process of the selection, what's the process of prioritizing what to save, what not to save, and in particular the gendered erasure in the archives. And right now I'm also working on how study of these archives of Kurdistan, can help us recover or uncover voices of women, lost voices of women. And again, because the assumption is that women's writing, Kurdish women's writing, Kurdish women's participation in society in many levels, cultural, artistic, intellectual, political, is a new phenomena. I mean, some argue that, for instance, women's writing was not significant until the last decades of the 20th century. Well, looking at the archive, we have a different picture. Women were there. Women were writing, were participating, were contributing, and actually had leading roles, like in setting up certain foundations, which are have been foundational in modern Kurdish history. Nevertheless, women's contributions have largely been erased in our history. I argue that archives give us is an incredible opportunity to discover, to uncover, recover these voices and this lost legacy.
Part of justice, isn't it? History writing, historiography, is part of justice mechanism. I think it should be. And we have little time left, unfortunately. I want to mention that I am in favor of a democratic world unity. The so-called United Nations, unfortunately, is not enough. It is better than nothing, but we need, I think, an eco-humanist, post-capitalist. I refuse myself to be limited to the narrow horizon of capitalism. This solidarity, and then Middle Eastern, secular democratic Middle East Federation, or can be part of it. No problem. We need more and more international, beyond national, whatever, collectivities. And what would you recommend to you are young, but younger Earthmates, on our planet? What would you recommend? We have less than a minute.
I don't really see myself in a position to advise the younger generation. I think they are incredibly smart, genius, resourceful, really, in imagining even a better world than my generation could imagine. I mean, we certainly see that. We have seen that in Iran, how they are the engine of the revolution, asking, demanding very clearly a change and a new world.
Yes, and we are supporting them 100%. Thank you so much.